Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live webinar called How to Stay Calm During Challenging Times with Dr. Srikumar Rao. We're so grateful that you joined us today. Now, as we're just getting started, please let us know where you're tuning in from by dropping your name and where you are in the chat box below. Wonderful. Hello, Petra. Petra from Croatia. We have Ula from Denmark. Hello, Diane in New Mexico. Luisa from Mexico. Wow, so many people from all over. Thank you so much for joining us. Angelique in New Jersey, Praveen in Boston, Rupal in Mumbai, Maria in Argentina. Amazing. Welcome, everyone. We're so thrilled that you're here. Now, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, and we are all experiencing this new reality in different ways. If you or those around you are feeling anxious, unsettled, or fearful, you are in the right place. Dr. Rao is going to address these emotions as well as common concerns in this webinar. As you know, this is a live webinar, so please be sure to stay until the end, as there will be an opportunity to ask Dr. Rao questions, and he will do his best to address as many as he can. Also, if you submitted a question in advance, thank you. Dr. Rao will address as many of these questions as he can at the end of this webinar as well. With that said, thank you again for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Rao.
Thank you, Katrina. And hello to all of you. Good morning, good evening, whatever part of the world you're in. Please let us begin with 1 minute of silence. And this is in honor of all of those who unfortunately had to leave the world during this crisis, and for those who are on the front lines fighting so that we can remain safe. During this 1 minute of silence, please breathe very deeply and keep your attention on your breath. Begin. Okay, everybody, we're back, and thank you for joining. A question that I get asked a lot these days is, what do I do about
Could you try again?
Beg your pardon?
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, folks, this is the very first time that we're doing a webinar like this, so sometimes technical problems arise. I promise we will straighten them out. So let me go back to what I was saying. One of the questions I get asked a great deal now is about anxiety. People are afraid. Persons around them are afraid. You're afraid about your health. You're afraid about your job prospects, your career. You're afraid about loved ones. So what do you do about this at a time like this? I'd like to use an analogy, and that is the analogy of a flashlight, or as we called it growing up in India, a torch. What does a torch do? What does a flashlight do? A flashlight illuminates whatever you shine it on. So you shine it on the person next to you and it illuminates that person. You shine it on the floor and it lights up the floor. Your awareness is like a flashlight. You probably don't think of it in that way, but it is. It really is. Your awareness is like a flashlight and it illuminates whatever it is you shine it on. And these days, because we're deluged with news, most of it bad from outside, we shine it on that. So you shine the flashlight of your awareness on what could happen. You could lose your job, you could become sick, your loved ones could become sick. And when you light that up, you not only give that your emotional energy, but you then start spinning a story about that to you. You could lose your job. If you lose your job, all kinds of things could happen. Maybe you'll be foreclosed, you'll be homeless, you know, what will happen to your children, things like that. These are all stories that you tell yourself, but they're extremely powerful stories and they grab your attention and move you into an emotional domain, which is very, very, very distressing. There is a way out of that, and the way out of that is actually pretty simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it's simple. You can understand it intellectually, and once you understand it intellectually, if you start applying it, it'll make a big difference. Shine the flashlight of your awareness, not on what could happen. Shine it on what is one thing that I can do, and preferably what is one thing that I can do right now. So put your attention there mindfully. If there are dishes in the sink, start cleaning the dishes. That's one thing that you can do right now. If your children are scared, you can talk to them and take their mind off what is happening to a fairy tale or to something in the past that they really enjoyed, or a story that you're going to read to them, anything that they can find, they can be engrossed in. Do the same thing. If you're talking to your parents and they are scared and they wonder whether they'll ever see you again, go back to perhaps a vacation that you went on and everybody was happy and you know there was sun and there was a beach and there was the sea, and just mention it. This is a very good time for you to think about questions. When you're talking to your parents, your friends, your children, think about what questions you can ask that you can get them to engage. And say you're talking to your father and he's in a nursing home and he's scared and he's anxious. Ask him about his childhood. Ask him about his college days. What subject did he really like? What subject did he really not like? Was there anything that happened that, like say, for example, he took a course that he thought he would absolutely detest, but he really loved it? Did he date? You know, what happened? Who was the first girl he ever fell in love with? So think about these things in advance and gradually engage people in conversation and get them to shine the flashlight of their awareness on these. Now, one of the things I frequently stress in my programs is that you ought to be in a default emotional domain of appreciation and gratitude. That holds during normal times, and it certainly holds during these coronavirus times. Because the wonderful thing about being in a domain of appreciation and gratitude, if that is your regular emotional domain, is when you're there, you're not scared, you're not anxious, you're not worried. You know, it just seems wonderful. And of course, the question that comes up is, Professor Rao, I don't feel appreciation and gratitude, I feel terrified. And this comes from people who recognize intellectually that it's a lot better to live in an emotional domain of appreciation and gratitude than in a domain of fear and uncertainty and anxiety. And why is this? The answer is actually pretty simple. When something like what we're going through right now with the coronavirus hits, it attacks us at a very visceral level. So we feel anxious, we feel fear. But when we think about being appreciative, okay, you know, what do I have to be appreciative about? Well, I have food to eat, I have a bed to sleep in, I have a roof over my head, and you recognize all that, but you recognize it intellectually. And that is a very, very, very pale shadow of a true feeling. So how do you get from the thinking of gratitude? That's what we do. Most of the time, because we're type A individuals who live in our heads, we get into thinking rather than feeling. So how do you get from a feeling of thinking gratitude to feeling to a point where you're actually feeling gratitude? You have to work at it. And one of the things that I've found does work is if you link up all the things that you're grateful for and you tell yourself stories about it. So you can't go, oh, well, I have a lot to be grateful for. Good health, check. Food to eat, check. Roof overhead, check. It doesn't work like that. Pick each one of these and toy with it, build a story around it, and connect it to all the other things. For example, you have food to eat. Think about that for a while. Because you have food to eat, you're not always thinking about how hungry you are and what you would do to get a good meal. So when your small daughter falls down and hurts herself, you can go up to her, grab her, and comfort her. Because you're not always thinking about food, when a client calls and he has a problem, you can troubleshoot with him over the phone or over Zoom. Because you're not bothered by pangs of hunger, you can get a good night's sleep. And by the way, you can also get a good night's sleep because you have a bed to sleep in. And that's wonderful. And because you have a bed to sleep in, guess what? You get up in the morning and you have to make the bed. And that is a wonderful way to start the day. In fact, there's a wonderful book by Admiral McRaven where he talks about these are the little routines that will help you a great deal in life. So when you get up in the morning, you make your bed. That's actually the title of his book. So, and you're grateful because you have a bed, you can do that. And that's going to lend structure to your life. And one of the things, by the way, that enable you to make the bed is because you have a roof over your head. And there are many people who got caught up in the tornadoes that struck the Midwest recently who may not have a roof over their heads. So don't just intellectually think, I have food, I have a bed to sleep in, I have a roof over my head. Think about the implications of all of these. Tell yourself stories about these things and link up those stories together. So what you have constructed is a web. And around each of the strands of this web, there is a story, and you add to these stories. And as your web becomes more complex and rich, you will find that the feeling of gratitude starts coming as opposed to only the thinking of gratitude. So I wanted to share these with you in these coronavirus times. And I'd now like to answer some of the questions that you did. Katrina, can you hear me? Can you ask the questions, please?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. Okay, so we've received a number of questions coming in from pre-written requests. The first one is, what are some tips to cope with the current crisis?
The biggest step is, there are two steps actually. One is your intent, and your intent should be, yes, this is a crisis, but I'm going to use this crisis to do two things. One, I'm going to work on myself so I am better off both in spiritually and in terms of my family and everything else. And this is possible, by the way. And the second thing is, from wherever I am, I will do whatever I can to help as many people as I can. You will notice that you're part of a circle, and this circle could comprise close members of your family, will include your friends, your work colleagues, and so on. And to the extent that you are an anchor of calm and a being who's rooted in things are okay. And at a deep level, they really are okay, despite the turmoil that's outside. And when you anchor yourself in this, your presence rubs off on those in your circle. So make that your intention. Understand, have you ever been in a situation, and I'm sure you've seen it in many movies, where people are frantic, something terrible is going to happen, but there is one person, generally the hero, and he is not going frantic, he's simply calm, he's thinking about what has to be done, and he does it. You have the opportunity to be that person in your small social circle. So the first thing is to recognize that you're being calm, not just for yourself, but for a whole bunch of other people, because in a very real sense, you're giving out vibrations which are being picked up. And especially if you have small children, it is incumbent upon you to do that, because your anxiety will rub off on many others and it will not serve them well. Next question, Katrina.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rao. The next question from a member of our community is, how will business be different? How can I make a deep impact after coronavirus? Should we limit our ambitions since they seem to occupy and cause imbalance in our life?
That's a very, very good question. How will life and business be different after COVID-19? I don't have a clue, but I can make guesses. Some of the things that will change are consumer behavior. Just as happened after the Great Depression, people are going to value what they think of as security. They're probably going to cut down on non-essential consumption. And there are going to be other changes, but the intersection of technology and behavior is so new that it's totally unpredictable. So I think it's wonderful that you are thinking about what do I do next after COVID-19. I think it's wonderful that you're thinking in terms of making a deep impact in the world. But I would like to suggest something. Don't think about what I can do to make a deep impact on the world. Think in terms of what am I being used for that will make a deep impact in the world. In other words, what I'm saying is, to the extent possible, get the I out of the picture. If you are going to make a deep impact in the world, that work is being done through you and not by you. Think of yourself as a vehicle by which change is happening in the world, in which good, if you will, is being done for a large community, I hope an ever larger community. And your attitude should be one of immense gratefulness, immense gratitude that you're being used as such a vehicle. So don't think in terms of what can I do to make a deep impact in the world. Think in terms of how can the universe act through me to make a deep impact, and what can I do to be a perfect instrument? And when you're doing that, you will find that you are much, much more powerful, and frequently you can get a great deal more accomplished than you thought that you could. But more important is the fact that you will actually grow spiritually and in every other dimension if you take the I out of the picture. And by no means limit your ambitions. Ambitions create imbalance only if you attach it to your well-being. Let me explain what I mean. You have a tremendous ambition. You want to conquer the world. You want to conquer the universe. Fantastic, go for it. And it's even better if you go for it, because I'm not out to conquer the universe. The universe is acting through me to make that happen. But if you don't tie that to your well-being, oh my God, I have to have this, otherwise I'm going to be unhappy, miserable, and my well-being is dependent on that. If that is where you get stuck in, you'll be in a very miserable place with a lot of imbalance in your life. But you have a massive ambition and you keep adding to it and you work steadfastly towards it. But you know what? It's perfectly wonderful if I succeed, and it's fabulous if I don't, because my personal well-being is not devoted to that. This is what I call invest in the process, do not invest in the action. And this is really one of the core principles in all of my programs and my coaching practice. Yes, you should have an ambition, you should have overweening ambition, but once you establish that, that simply establishes the direction in which you want to go. And once that has been established, you try your level best to achieve it. And if you succeed, fabulous. If you don't succeed, fabulous. Here is a mistake that most of us make. We have ambitions, we set high goals, and we think that the purpose of having set such a high goal and trying our level best to achieve it is achieving it. That's not so. The purpose of setting a high goal and trying your level best to achieve it is the learning and growth that happen to you as you try to achieve it. If you actually succeed in achieving it, fantastic. That's a bonus. Be immensely grateful. If you don't succeed in achieving it, still fantastic, because the learning and growth have happened anyway. That is the benefit. So this is a no-lose proposition. So how should you behave after COVID-19? If you want to make a dent in the universe, go all out for it. But go all out for it with the knowledge that you are an instrument for something far bigger than you, which is using you for its purpose. Be grateful that you are being used by it, and do the level best you can. And the learning and the growth and the development will happen by itself. And when you take that attitude, you're likely to accomplish far more than you ever thought you could. Next question, Katrina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. Okay, the next question is, how do you deal with negative people in your life, especially when they are close, like siblings and parents?
That is, again, a very good question, and I get asked that a lot. First of all, if you can, don't stick the label negative person on them, because that automatically has a connotation which is not very nice and hurts both you and them. Because underneath what you perceive as negativity or negative behavior is an amalgam of many feelings of anger, of fear, of anxiety, of frustration, and things of that nature. Recognize that this person is who he is or who she is as a result of the cumulative life experience of that person and their particular methods of interpreting them. Now, understand always that you have a choice. And the choice is the following. When somebody comes up to you and is expressing negative views of the world and is depressed and generally in a downward spiral, you can either let that person pull you out of your cocoon and drag you down with him or her, or you can be so firmly anchored in your well-being that you lift him out of his downward spiral and get him to see that, yes, there is a sun in the sky and it's shining and there are beautiful clouds. So simply look upon it as this is a game. And here is a person who is occupying a space I don't want to occupy. So as long as I can remain where I am, I can observe him, I can feel compassion for him, but I don't have to go and live in the house that he has chosen for himself. And if I'm strong enough in where I am, perhaps I can get him to come and spend some time in my house. And my house is bright and sunny and airy and a wonderful place to live in. So just look upon it as a game in which you're doing that. And one of the things that you always have the capacity to do is to recognize and have compassion for people, recognize how terrible it must be to inhabit the world that they're living in. What kind of thoughts, what kind of mental chatter do they have that drive them to express the views that they are doing? And when you are the observer of that rather than the judger of that, you will find that you are less likely to go there, and compassion wells out of you almost organically without you having to try to do that. So think about that. To the extent possible, have compassion for all. And as you do that, you will find that they may be toxic people, but they're still close ones to you, so you can love them without being them or going on the journey that they would like to take you on. Get them to come on your journey. Try it. Next, Katrina.
Wonderful, thank you. So another member of our community asks, how do we make sense of our work during this time when we are not doing anything related to healthcare, which appears to be the need of the day?
Again, a very good question. And to answer this, actually, you have to go some deeper levels. Yes, you may not be a healthcare worker, and that is the need of the day, but there's other things you can do. A member of my community, an alumnus of my course, actually set up a program whereby she recognized I'm not a healthcare worker and I'm not on the front lines and I'm not trained, but there is stuff that I can do for people who are on the front line because they have needs too. So they, for example, need someone to shop for them, perhaps babysit for them, take care of their laundry, so on. And she actually is trying to organize people who can provide these secondary services that are needed by those on the front line so that they can go continue doing what they're doing. That's just one example, but understand that this situation, this lockdown that we are in, is not going to last forever. And eventually things are going to open up, life is going to get back. It's not going to get back to the way it was before, but some other things will happen again. We will need a functioning economy, and you can be a part of that. So by husbanding your strength, by keeping your emotional balance, by helping others around you keep their emotional balance, and doing what it is you can to combat the forces of anger, of despair, of frustration, you're actually helping to preserve a stable society, and that is not a mean contribution. So consciously recognize that you're doing that, and perhaps what you're doing is not immediately relevant in the crisis, but could be extremely relevant in the intermediate to longer term horizon. So focus on that and keep your cool and help those around you do the same. Next, Katrina.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question from a member of our community is, how do we get more comfortable with not knowing what to do?
Actually, I think that is a question which is true not just of these times, but of any time. And I run across that frequently with persons who feel stuck in their career, who feel that their marriage is in a rut, who had great ambitions at one time, but find that they're not making progress. And the short answer to that is the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. And you don't always see how that journey is, which are the loops and the setbacks and the zigzags you have to take. And the honest answer is you don't really need to know. You only need to know one thing, which is what is the next step. So when you are confused, don't dwell on your confusion. Simply dwell on, given where I am, the life learning I have, the emotions that I entertain, and the totality of the package that constitutes who I am right now, what is the next thing for me to do? And simply put all of your emotional energy into that next thing. And, if there are dishes in the sink, clean them. Be mindful about taking the next step. And as you're mindful about taking the next step, the step after that will become clear, and then the step after that. Every once in a while, you gain great clarity and you know exactly what it is that you're called upon to do. And have that as an ideal, throw your intent out and wait for that clarity to come, because clarity will not come because you suddenly want clarity to come. Clarity will not come because you are trying desperately to gain it. Clarity will come when you have some degree of control over your mental chatter, when you've done some of the exercises. And in fact, this is a good thing to know. And I have laid out many of the exercises in my program, in my book, Are You Ready to Succeed? And it also gives you a roadmap for when you do these exercises, what happens is the tumult that is constantly driving you, your mental chatter, quietens down to some extent. And to the extent that it does, you will see that you can see farther. It's like your world is all clouded up, and when the clouds start to dissipate, you can see the road ahead and you can see more of the road ahead. So it's a gradual process. So don't get worried about the fact that you don't know what to do. Just take the next step with the confidence that when you have taken it, the step after that will reveal itself. Next question, Katrina.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, I feel overwhelmed many times during the day. How do I deal with this?
That's another very good question, and I'm sure that a number of the persons on this podcast can relate to that. One part of it is an exercise that we did at the start of this, which is pause. Sit down in a comfortable chair. You can even do it standing up. Just make sure that your spine is straight and breathe deeply. Most of the time, we use only the upper third of a thoracic cavity. Breathe very deeply. Feel your belly expanding as you breathe in. Feel it contracting as you breathe out, and follow your breath in and follow your breath out. You'll find that anytime that you're agitated or overwhelmed, you're always breathing shallow and you're breathing fast. So just the very act of breathing slow will center you to some extent. And the other thing that you do is think about what I said, the analogy of the flashlight. Shine the flashlight of your awareness on what can I do, as opposed to what could happen. Every time you're feeling overwhelmed, you got a feeling of there is so much that I have to do and I don't have enough time to do it all, and you're being very me-centered. It's a given, you're not going to be able to do it all, but put all your energy into what you can do, and when you do that mindfully, you'll find that you feel less overwhelmed. Next, Katrina. And by the
Wonderful.
way, I think if there are questions coming in, feel free to ask some of the questions that are coming in now from the audience.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, let's do that. So Krishna asks, how do we reconcile two extreme feelings? I'm struggling to reconcile what I consider to be the two extreme feelings during the crisis. Number one, all the unfortunate impacts to humans all over the world. And two, the positivity in the situation, less abuse of our resources, peace of being for our animals, allowing Earth to just breathe, and humans being more sincere, returning to simplicity and exhibiting kind, genuine behaviors instead of being so busy. How do we reconcile these two extreme feelings, which often cause anxiety and uncertainty?
The short answer to that is don't reconcile them, because you cannot. Let me repeat that. You cannot reconcile them. When you have a situation such as you're facing now, both the very best of humanity and the very worst of humanity tends to come out. That's simply the nature of things. Recognize this, and you decide where you're going to where you're going to shine the flashlight of your awareness. In other words, you have someone who's doing heroic things to help others. Say, that's where I want to be. That is an expression of who I am as a person. So I'm going to support that person. Not only am I going to support that person, I'm going to emulate the person, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help him or her and others like her. And that's what you focus on. Ultimately, recognize, Krishna, that the question you asked is a question in duality. And the only way that you are ever going to deal with it is to transcend it. You can never understand it, but you can transcend it. And you only transcend it by moving to a higher level of consciousness. And you can't move to a higher level of consciousness by an effort of will. You can get to a point where the actions that you do, the mental chatter that you entertain, the mental models that you hold are conducive to taking you to this higher level, and that's what you focus on. So yes, the best in humanity is coming out. Focus on that. Do what you can to help others. Do what you can to help those who are helping others, and simply view that as this is my path. Next question, Katrina.
Thank you. Okay, so Paolo asks, how do you cope with a loss due to the COVID in a time where you are secluded and hence you are prone to overthinking about the situation?
Yeah, overthinking about the situation is very common, and it is actually nothing but mental chatter. And the best way to deal with mental chatter is don't try to control it directly, because you cannot. What you can do is you can observe that this is happening. And yes, there have been many instances, especially in New York, which is one of the hot epicenters of the coronavirus, where people are dying, and they're dying all alone, not in contact with loved ones. And sometimes perhaps the loved ones don't even know that they have passed on. This is truly a human tragedy. And there are no words for it. The only thing that you can do is recognize that we come into this journey that we call life alone and we depart alone. That is simply the nature of things are, the way things are. So what you can do is in your mind, have a conversation with that person and wish him or her well as they move on from one stage to the next stage, and you don't know what that next stage is. So just wish them well. May they rest in peace. Next, Katrina.
Thank you. So the next question is from Omar. I miss physical human contact. It's been 2 months since I have not hugged somebody. What do I do?
That is a very good one. It's a good time for you to practice visualization. Imagine, and I'm facing this very situation. I have a grandson, and we're supposed to have met several times in the time that we've been in lockdown. And I spent a lot of time looking at him on FaceTime and imagining that I am hugging him, I talk to him, I recite poems to him. But it's not quite the same thing, but it's an exercise for you to practice your mindfulness and practice your imagination, if you will. And that really is the best that you can do. And pray for a time when this ends. But you will find, by the way, that when you are visualizing it, it's definitely not the same thing as actually doing it, but you will find that it is much better than simply regretting. Next question, Katrina.
Thank you. Rohit asks, I'm suffering from kidney failure. How should I keep positive about the future and stay motivated and happy?
Again, a good one. Anytime somebody asks, how can I stay positive? My answer is don't. Don't try to stay positive. This is very important because every time you ask yourself, how can I stay positive? You've already decided that something has happened which is negative, and you now have to find something positive in this thing that has happened that is negative. In other words, you've already stuck a bad thing label on it. Don't do that. Don't label anything that happens to you as this is bad, because the moment you label something that happens to you as this is bad, you start to suffer. Instead, something happens to you, simply label this happened. Okay, my kidney is failing. What do I have to do? Well, there's stuff that you have to do, which includes medicines, which might include dialyzers and things like that. And you do what you have to do. But you'll find that if you make an attempt, it's possible to do it as this is what I have to do, as opposed to, oh my God, this is so bad. How can I find something positive out of it? And if you're simply focusing on this is what I have to do, you'll find that there are some aspects of it which are preferable to others, and you can focus more of your emotional energy on that. And by doing that, you'll come to a point where you may never actually enjoy it. I mean, who would enjoy kidney failure? But at the same time, it's not something that's sucking you into a vortex of grief and despair. I know it's not easy, but there is no alternative. Do not let yourself be swallowed down into a vortex of despair, because if you do, not only will it feel terrible, but it will also have very adverse health and physical consequences. So I repeat, don't try to stay positive. You don't have to try and stay positive if you simply label whatever happened to you as not that this is bad, but this happened. Okay, so what do I do now? And that's where you focus all of your emotional energy. Next, Katrina, are there any other questions that came in previously that we haven't gotten to?
Yes, we have, is it better to stop planning? Example, buying a big house, planning for big dreams. It seems like a dead end. That's one of the questions.
We never know how life unfolds. Sometimes we think we're going on a path to huge success and we plateau and, even backtrack. There are people who've been exceedingly wealthy who all of a sudden have lost all their money. Is that going to happen to you? Who knows? We don't know what the future holds for us. But my advice always in such things is no, don't stop planning. Have grandiose plans, but have grandiose plans with the knowledge that working to achieve those plans will benefit you in terms of your learning and growth. Whether or not you will actually achieve those plans is beyond your control. So don't make your well-being dependent on it. So if you have great plans and you try your level best to achieve them, and if you do fine, if you don't fine, because the learning and growth have happened to you, then you're in very good shape. So make that a point. If you feel inclined, you have a preference for making a grand plan, by all means, do so. Just don't make your well-being dependent on achieving those plans. Simply put it out as this is the direction I'm called upon to take, so I will. And I will do my level best, and then throw it up to the universe to see what happens. And if you do that, you will be fine. And with that spirit, I would encourage you to not only make plans, but make even grander plans. Just don't get hung up on making your well-being dependent on those plans bearing full fruition. Next, Katrina.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to consolidate a few of these questions because they're very similar. I'll read both of them. Adnan states, I'm a frontline worker as well as my wife. I'm worried about my 9-month-old child, as if something happens to us, what will happen to her? These feelings are more pronounced as every day some frontline worker is dying, including colleagues. My mother also passed away several months ago. Overall, I am overwhelmed with the situation, how to keep calm. And following up on that, Nicola also asked, if an emotional down happens and I happen to be in a negative spiral, which pulls me deeper, is there a specific tool to help me come out of it before it gets too deep? It seems like these questions are perhaps very similar, both asking how to stay calm.
Yes. Some of this I addressed before, but let me address it again. If you feel that you're going in a downward spiral, center yourself, and you can center yourself, as I said, by just taking a very short time, a couple of minutes off to breathe very, very deeply and slowly. The second thing is it's a very, very legitimate concern if both you and your partner are in a high-risk situation being exposed to coronaviruses every day. And it might not be a bad idea for you to consider perhaps one of us should stay away from possible sources of infection. And if that's possible, that's something to explore. And for the other person, it is be mindful, take every precaution possible, including whatever you can do to disinfect yourself. And, beyond that, the only thing that you can do is trust to the universe. But mindfully go through the process of decontaminating yourself, and mindfully also go through the process that there is a mental model you can hold. And the mental model really is, I have been put on this earth to accomplish something, and I may or may not be clear on what it is that I have to accomplish. And this is true of every person. We are put on this earth in the human form because there is something that we have to learn and accomplish. And the moment that is done, our body drops. So if my body drops, it is because I have accomplished whatever it is that I have been put on earth to do. So let go gracefully. This is a model. And like all models, you can neither prove it true nor prove it false. But adopting this model is a source of immense strength and acceptance. How do you go about adopting such a model? That is just because you recognize that a model is intellectually superior doesn't necessarily mean that you can adopt it. But what you can do is play around with this model in your head, start feeling comfortable with it. And the more you play around with it and start feeling comfortable, the more it seems as if you can adopt it. And one day you'll find that you don't have to try actively to adopt it. It has adopted you. So something to bear upon, but that is a wonderful question. This is a crisis, and as with all crises, you can either use it as a learning opportunity and a time to grow, or you can let you suck it down into frustration and anxiety and despair. Use it as an opportunity to learn to grow. And by the way, if this is something that calls to you, in other words, you really need to find an answer to that, I would recommend you getting a copy of my book, Are You Ready to Succeed? Because I deal with this and other mental models at some detail. Next question, Katrina.
Yes, thank you. KS asks, how do we create optimism and hope in our teams? And also, how can we build resilience to bounce back soon after the crisis?
Again, an excellent question. First of all, don't try to build optimism, because when you try to make it a conscious effort to build optimism, it generally doesn't work. Instead of trying to build optimism, try to build a shared vision of what can be done and begin right now. What are things that need to be done? And when you do that, you'll find all kinds of things pop up. For example, my daughter is working in a firm, and what this firm does is it manages, it's called Pay Range, by the way, and it manages a whole bunch of situations, like in a laundry, wherever you have to feed in money in order to do your laundry, and a whole range of things like that, and it manages these. So she came up with an idea where you could ask persons, by the way, if you contribute X above whatever your particular charges are, 100% of this will go to provide free laundry services to frontline workers, and it'll be given to them directly. And this created such an outpouring that they raised tens of thousands of dollars, and all of these dollars are going directly to the nurses, the paramedics, the doctors, who incidentally have far higher laundry needs at this time than they would have normally, because every time they come off shift, they got to wash everything again. And it's well received. That's just an example, but these are the kinds of things that you can get them to start thinking about. And once you get them thinking in that direction, it's amazing what kind of creative juices you unleash. That is what your focus is. Don't try to build optimism directly. Try to get them to focus on a vision of what the world could be like, and starting immediately, what is it that I can do or we can do as a company to help those who are in need, and especially help those who are catering to those who are in need. And as you do that, you might very well find that not only does it take care of the present in terms of the emotional energy of the persons on your team, but it might also give you a new vision for your company, for your organization. Next, Katrina.
Okay, we have a few more questions. Samantha asks, I have a job that I can do from home that contributes to helping deal with the pandemic, and therefore I could spend every second of the day doing it because it is important. But I know it's not sustainable both emotionally and physically. How do I manage to stay emotionally well, but also keep helping with the pandemic?
That's an excellent question. And I'd like to direct your attention to something that happens every time you get on a plane. Of course, I bet you have not got on a plane recently, but think back to the last time you were. And invariably, it happens that there is someone, one of the flight attendants probably, who will tell you, in case of a decompression of whatever kind, a mask will drop from the roof. And you're always enjoined to put the mask on yourself first, and then look around and see who you can help. It's very much the same way. You have to look after yourself and your emotional needs first, because if you are an emotional wreck, you are no good to anybody else. So plan your day, do the level best you can at the time that you are doing what you can to help the healthcare workers who are on the front line. Put your mind, be mindful about it and what you are doing. Don't think of yourself as I am doing this. Think of yourself as the instrument through which this help is being delivered. And any instrument needs to be cared for. If it's a surgical scalpel, it needs to be autoclaved or sterilized. If it's an axe, it needs to go to the grindstone. So do what you can. When you feel that you're no longer being mindful, when you're being agitated, you're feeling the frustration of the persons with whom you're working coming into you, time out. Go back, do a deep breathing exercise, take a nap, and then come back and do it. So there's no science to this. It's an art form. You're the only person who knows when you're about to slip. Every time that happens, step back. But the most important thing is don't beat yourself on the head. Don't say, oh my God, I should be doing this. I should be working 24/7. Why am I doing that? That is pointless. Do what you can, do it mindfully. When you feel that you can no longer do it mindfully and you're getting emotionally traumatized, step back, take a set of deep breaths, take a nap if you have to, grab a meal, and then go back and doing it, and go back to doing it mindfully. This could go on for a long time, so just make your peace with that. Next question, Katrina.
Yes, Jyoti asks, the way things look right now, I feel I'm not able to do many of the things I love to do, including travel. I feel trapped. How can I get through this period?
There are, in fact, many things that you like to do that you are not able to do, but the feeling trapped is actually a mental construct. Understand that there are many orders, spiritual orders, for example, where persons stay long stretches of time in a solitary cell or a cave or a room because they are meditating. And in that meditation, they find greater freedom than untrammeled travel. Remember the words of the poet, stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. You got a model in which you have to have these things, and these are associated with physical freedom, and that's what you equate with freedom. And perhaps you can use this time now as an opportunity to question, does that mental model serve me well? And if you do that, who knows? You might find that the greatest freedom lies in expanding the boundaries of your mind and not in terms of going all over the place. Try that. Next question, Katrina.
Yes, another member asked, are these times of crisis really the best time to reinvent oneself, take risks, start new ventures, ? Why? I seem to have missed past crises and wouldn't like to miss this one.
Okay. This implies a model, and this model requires, oh, here is a crisis, here's a time of great turmoil, and I don't want to miss it. I would suggest that the opportunity for you to grow is there all the time. The only thing that's different in this term of crisis is that you might actively recognize that this could be an opportunity for you to grow. So you don't need to have a crisis for you to grow. It is true that in terms of a crisis, it becomes very readily apparent that some of the mental models you hold are dysfunctional and not serving you well. They're thrown into sharper relief, if you will. And if that has happened in your own case, by all means, embrace it. But that leads us to a whole nest of underlying questions. Which of your mental models are not serving you well? What do you mean by not serving you well? And those are very deep discussions, which obviously it's not possible to address in a short webinar like this one. But I simply want to lay open a line of thinking. And the line of thinking is, any time is a good time for you to make a change, perhaps even a radical change in your life, in your business, in your career, in every aspect of it. The major advantage of a crisis is not that this provides an opportunity. The opportunity was always there. But what a crisis does is lays bare to you what are the things that are definitely not working and need to be changed. And you're the only person who can address what this crisis has laid open to you. And it's a wonderful idea to start making changes in what has been laid bare to you. Next one, Katrina.
Yes, Dan asks, can you please tell the story of good thing, bad thing?
Oh, yes. Okay, this actually is a very powerful tale, and it comes from there are many versions of the tale. It comes from the Sufi tradition, and it talks about a man and his son, and they lived in a beautiful valley, and they were very poor. The man got sick and tired of being poor. He decided he was going to become a rich man, and he was going to become a rich man by breeding horses. So he bought a stallion, didn't have enough money to buy a stallion. He borrowed very heavily from the neighbors. And the very day he got the stallion, it kicked the top bar loose from the paddock and ran away. And the neighbors came running around and said, "You were going to become a rich man, but your stallion has run away. You are in poor shape, and you still owe us money." And the man shrugged his shoulder and said, "Good thing, bad thing, who knows?" That stallion fell in with a group of wild horses, and they were close to where the man lived, and he was able to entice them into the paddock, which he had repaired, so escape was no longer possible. So now he had the stallion back, plus a dozen wild horses, which by the standards of that village made him a wealthy man. So the neighbors came around saying, "We thought you were destitute, but fortune has smiled upon you. You're a rich man." And he shrugged his shoulder and said, "Good thing, bad thing, who knows?" The man and his son started to break the horses so they could sell them on the market. One of the horses threw the man's son and stomped on his leg, and it broke and it healed crooked. And the neighbors came around and said, "We thought you were destitute, but we thought that you were a rich man, but now you have a son who's got a crooked leg, and nobody's going to, they're not going to find a girl to, you're not going to find a girl to marry." Sorry, I'm skipping. And the man shrugged his shoulder and said, "Good thing, bad thing, who knows?" That summer, the king of the country declared war on a neighboring country. Press gangs moved through the villages, rounding up all the able-bodied young men to serve in the army. But this man's son was spared because he had a gained leg. So neighbors came around crying, "We don't know if we'll ever see our sons alive again, but you still have your son. How fortunate." And he shrugged his shoulder and said, "Good thing, bad thing, who knows?" It goes on like that forever. The reason behind the story is, can you imagine any time in your life when something happened that was terrible, but you can now look back upon it and say, "Hey, that wasn't terrible. Maybe even that was a good thing." Most people can recall many such instances. I remember there was a swimmer who really wanted to do well in a meet. And a few months before that, he slipped on a patch of ice and broke his wrist. And he thought his professional career was over. But he was moping, and his coach told him to stop moping and get on with it. But for weeks and weeks, the only thing that he could do was kick by the side of the pool while his teammates were practicing furiously. So we fast forward to the actual meet, and one of the most important events, his opponent swam the race of his life, and he was behind at the halfway mark, and he should have lost. But he hung in there, and he won that race by 1/100th of a second. It's one of the closest finishes in the history of athletic competition. And they had to go to the fast frame-by-frame photographs to show that he actually touched the wall a whisker before his inspired opponents. But those photographs also showed something. At the finish, he was still kicking. His opponent's legs were trailing. The race was the 100-meter butterfly in the Beijing Olympics. The swimmer was Michael Phelps. That's what gave him his 7th gold medal. And without it, he would never have gotten 8 gold medals in a single Olympics to create an all-time record. Those weeks and weeks, he always had a killer kick, but those weeks and weeks of practicing by the side of the pool gave him muscles he never had before. So arguably, a case can be made that breaking his wrist was the very best thing that ever happened to him, professionally speaking. So think back on your life. Can you recall any instance when something happened that at the time it happened you thought was terrible, but you can now look back upon it and say, "Hey, that wasn't so bad after all." So what you're today about to label bad, could it in X years turn out to be good? Asking yourself that question, just asking yourself that question, will move you to a different emotional domain. And if you then ask yourself the next question, is there anything that I can proactively do to make it good? And all of a sudden, you're moved into a realm of possibility instead of a realm of despair. It's a very, very, very powerful technique. I think we have time for one more question, Katrina.
Okay. Wow, there's still a lot of questions. Okay, so is there any material we could read and share to inspire us to support low-income people during these times? How do we focus our creativity and energy on being an instrument to inspire and help people going through unbelievable challenges? No job, limited food, etc. Many thanks.
That is a wonderful question. I'm glad that this is the last question for this one. Ends on a beautiful note. The first thing is to be clear about your intent and actually anchor yourself in that. The next thing is do some research. There are numerous organizations that are devoted to exactly this. A Google search will turn up many of them, and find out what it is that you can about these organizations, how much of the money donated to them actually goes to the cause, and is this a cause that you believe in? Who are the persons who are in executive positions? Are they persons of integrity, and things of that nature? So that's one part, and contribute what you can to help them. The other thing is do what you can to help them on a personal level. One of the persons who took my course, and in fact, she was a teaching assistant, used to pass a homeless person. And she gradually made friends with him, found out what his background was in bits and pieces, helped him to change some of his mental models. And eventually he landed up in low-income housing, but in an apartment of his own. And she served as a support to help him turn his life around. Look around the circle, see who are the people whom you feel compassion for, reach out to any one of them, and see what you can do to be a personal instrument of change in that person's life. And get rid of the feeling that I am doing this. Simply view yourself as the universe is working with me, through me, to help this particular individual, and do the best that you can for that person. And with that, we're done. So I thank all of you, whichever part of the world you're in. Over to you, Katrina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rao. And thank you everyone for joining. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this webinar. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and got a lot of value out of your time spent here today. We will be sending out a recording later this afternoon for many of you who asked about that. Before we sign off, I want to share an opportunity you may be interested in, including personal coaching. If this is of interest, please contact jacqueline.fox@theRaoInstitute.com. You can also learn about Dr. Rao's other programs by contacting Jacqueline. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. And so from Dr. Rao and all of us at the Rao Institute, we wish you a beautiful, peaceful day. We look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.